Okay, the first question. A fifth of Ukrainian territories remain under Russian occupation. The invaders really are violent and do what they want. And the situation in the war zones is approaching to a humanitarian disaster. The infrastructure for supplying water, gas for heating, and electricity has been destroyed, and there is not enough food and medicine. How to overcome such crisis situations?
Well, with most emergencies, we must prepare in advance for the emergency. There are some things that can be used to mitigate the situation at this time, but the best way is for each individual family to store the food, medicine, water, or at least have water purification capabilities so that they can gather surface water and treat it and make it safe to drink. They should store food in their homes in advance, and that is what I do. So that makes these emergencies much more manageable. The government can't really manage the problems when the transportation and communication systems are challenged.
Can you tell me about can you tell me about the experience of your country doing in emergency situations? When do you announce the evacuation, and how do the authorities act and government act in when some regions are in trouble?
That's not, well, the evacuation is very difficult uh, because there are so many and so many large resources are required. But and I'm not sure of the situation in Ukraine and if most individuals have access to an automobile. But we have seen some situations, like in Florida, where they are anticipating a hurricane and they have a few days to prepare. And if it is coordinated and communicated appropriately, then they can make arrangements for uh, uh, individuals to stage their evacuation so that they do not clog the roads and make it impassable for everyone. That was recently done this year in Florida by Government DeSantis, and it went quite well. They also used public resources such as school buses and such to help evacuate people.
Are there any protocols anywhere in the world what to do with less mobile population groups such as children and elderly and in a war zone?
That is also very difficult. The families should stick together and try to help the elderly that they normally help. And it is unfortunate that multi-generational families don't exist that way anymore. However, in our culture and in this area and with our family, we do have um, regular contact with our uh, parents and children and grandchildren and such, and we would work together as a group to make sure the resources would available to move those people. So you almost need small community or family groups or neighborhood groups to be able to work together to cover all of the requirements for taking care of all the individuals that are less capable.
Uh, how? should any country in general prepare for the fact that a big amount of people will have nothing to eat, drink, they won't have electricity or heating?
Um, the pair is Switzerland. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Swiss civil defense system, but the Swiss people have an underground shelter that is largely bomb-proof for all of their uh, population, and those shelters are already stocked with food and supplies and water for them to be able to survive in those shelters for a substantial amount of time. Any country that decides to do that, I believe, would have the resources to do it. But time is the ultimate resource. And at this point, you are out of time. The Swiss have been working these, and in the 1980s, they were spending roughly $30 per citizen per year in order to build and maintain their civil defense structure. They they use older people, 50 and older, to maintain the civil defense system. And all of the younger men are issued a rifle and ammunition, and so they are already prepared as a defense force, and that is how they maintain their neutrality, and that's what kept them from getting invaded in during the Second World War, and it's also uh, well, what kept the Japanese from invading the U.S. mainland during the Second World War. If every able-bodied man has a rifle and ammunition that is immediately available, then you can prepare a fairly significant military response to any invasion in a relatively short period of time. They also practice with the rifles on a regular basis, and you'd have to consider them at least very, very able, if not expert, riflemen or soldiers. They have a motto in Switzerland that says, "We are the army," and the entire population is part of that army.
Except of Switzerland, can you tell me some more examples of states which interest who states that have well-developed infrastructure which is ready for such kind of situations?
I know uh, there are quite a few countries that have a civil defense system. A lot of them, plan on using their underground subway systems. Um, a lot of the Scandinavian countries, Switzerland, Denmark, uh, have some underground shelters. They also require military training for most of their young men, and so they are largely ready. But I would say Switzerland is head and shoulders above any other country in the world as far as preparation for any kind of war. They're actually preparing for a nuclear war. We used to have a saying amongst the people involved in civil defense here that if you are prepared for a nuclear war, you are prepared for essentially any disaster. And I believe that's largely true. More recently, we have added chemical and biological warfare to that. So if you're prepared for nuclear, chemical, and biological warfare, you are prepared for essentially any disaster.
If the country wants to develop its infrastructure, what should be the first steps?
I would say the first step is to moderate or at least be honest about what the government can do for the people. A lot of time, a government wants to say or wants to uh, indicate that they have they have things under control and that they can take care of disaster situations. In reality, in a true nationwide or worldwide crisis, the governments simply do not have the resources to take care of each individual. So they first need to communicate that individuals need to be um, they need to be prepared to function on their own for many weeks to months, and that the government can then, start to build shelters and structures. Um, we once estimated that it would take roughly $50 billion to make an underground shelter for everyone in the United States. The shelters can be mass produced and then buried and uh, put on site in a relatively short period of time. And during normal times when you have uh, normal transportation and supply lines are functioning, um, you could probably take care of that within a few years, even for a country as large as the United States. Second of all, well, there are lots of things that an individual can do to make themselves more capable of surviving on their own and providing for themselves. And that includes the heat, the food, and such. And most people think that that's a daunting task, and in fact, it borders on impossibility. But it is actually very practical, and that's what our organization, the American Civil Defense Association, has been trying to promote, is individual preparedness for disaster situations. We promote, well, um, we we suggest that people obtain this book, and it's out of, what would you say, it's out of copyright, and so it can be downloaded for free. And this has, well, it talks a lot about nuclear war, but it also talks about building underground shelters, about building expedient cold weather clothing, expedient wheat grinders, expedient, anything you need to do, basically um, uh, taking materials that would be normally available and converting them to a use that can help you survive. Well, we also promote our publication, which is also free in digital format, and that is when we figure out something uh, that can help people survive. We put it in that publication. For example, with the heating systems being challenged, the heating and the uh, uh, all of the utilities being threatened as they are now in Ukraine, we suggest that people. This is actually uh, a set of underwear that's made of polyurethane, open cell polyurethane foam, and it's covered by nylon to make it nice and slick, so it is comfortable against your body. But if you just lay it against your cheek for a little while, you notice the warmth in it. And a person, and in fact, there are people who have lived in a mobile home that was with less than great insulation. They have lived without utilities in a mobile home through a winter where the temperatures were normally, well, they would average near freezing or just below, and they had been able to survive okay because they had the right clothing. And that is something perhaps that since the Ukraine is receiving a lot of aid right now, I think the appropriate amount of appropriate types of aid could actually be a great blessing or a great help to you. If there are commercial companies that are manufacturing that type of clothing, and the key to that clothing is that it has no affinity for moisture. It insulates very well, and so it can be used indefinitely, even in a cold situation, and it will not load up with moisture and become ineffective. Most winter clothing can or will tend to absorb moisture, and the insulation properties will be degraded as it absorbs moisture from the body. But if this type of clothing can actually help people survive without at least heating utilities for a while. Although we suggest that cooking food is also very important, and we should maintain some fuel for cooking as well. It's difficult to go, totally without cooking food and having no utilities for that. There's also many types of equipment these days with small portable power generation systems that use solar panels and an internal battery and inverter to produce the type of electricity needed to run most appliances and to provide electricity for communications and lighting. And they are also very much available and actually could be used to help mitigate the disasters and the crisis situation in Ukraine at this point.
Are you studying the experience of Ukraine in overcoming this crisis, and what conclusions have already you can have already do about that?
Well, I like to study all crisis situations. I read books and I like to see how people behave in a crisis situation, and I'm always impressed that survival is a matter of mostly knowledge and knowing what to do in that situation, and not panicking. Um, Humans tend to either suffer from normalcy bias, where they do not give adequate weight or priority to the developing crisis, or they um, aren't all that effective to actually help them survive. And so if the best thing to do is to gather the knowledge, and that is what we've been trying to do, and disseminate it. And once people absorb that knowledge and they think through these scenarios, like what will I do when the power is out? What will I do when there is no more fuel to heat the buildings? Or what will I do if there is an invasion? I'm not sure what went on in Ukraine um, during the buildup of the Russians on the border of Ukraine, but it seems like I would have been doing many many things to evacuate and prepare the population in order to be able to take care of that situation. It didn't. I know not going to invade, um, but um, but they should have been making some rather drastic preparations then. I guess I would add it is nice to simply avoid the war in the first place, and I do believe this war was largely avoidable, and I do believe that the United States government was somewhat responsible. The Putin had said that he would not allow a NATO member to be on his doorstep, but the leadership of the United States kept going over to Europe and Ukraine and saying that that they would welcome Ukraine into NATO. And so I believe that Putin was largely provoked. And if they would have simply said, okay, Ukraine will not be part of NATO, we will allow a buffer for Russia, then Putin would not have been provoked into invading Ukraine.
Oh, I must say that this conflict when Russia wanted to occupy the states, smallest states, which were in orbit of United of Soviet Union. So it was. I'm sure it was like it was decided before, so we had no chance to avoid that, I think. So, but of course, I think it should be done by the war shouldn't happen. I think that of course. There should be more diplomacy in these efforts to stop, to prevent that. But of course, Russia is aggressive. You can see what it does in Georgia, what it does in Moldova. She provokes all these conflicts. She provokes separatism, and so that's what she does. And I want to ask you such question. Uh, what survival strategy should the government follow in the situation when a very big group of people is under the risk? So, what maybe you can say by example of your country.
What example of our country in doing what? Preparing for the preparing the
Yeah,
population?
yes, preparing for survival strategy for helping a big group of population. So how to
Okay.
protect a big group of population?
Yes. I would give them the same advice that I just gave you. I would let the government, let the people know that the government cannot take care of them, and suggest that they take steps to try and work with local and state and our national emergency management people to say that emergencies are not easy to manage by their very nature, and therefore each individual has to be prepared to manage the crisis on their own, and that makes it much more manageable. And that's the only way it really can be manageable. So I'm also very disappointed in our government in not having a civil defense program. They um, they have talked about creating a civil defense program and creating underground shelters for the people. And if you go back and look at the Journal of Civil Defense in the 60s and 70s, it was mainly focused on the political debate and struggle to motivate the government to actually do something about protecting the population. However, the government adopted the doctrine of mutual assured destruction, in that they were going to build a nuclear arsenal that would prevent any other country um, from attacking us, because they would face significant destruction as well. However, in the um, in the late 1980s, the U.S. government stopped building nuclear warheads, and the warheads that we have now are well beyond the design life that they were originally specified for, and they also quit testing the nuclear weapons that we have. So right now we don't know if they will work. I was involved in the defense industry in making the ballistic missiles to deliver those warheads, but the warheads themselves are are questionable at this time. So we don't really have a good mutual assured destruction, and we are a good threat of mutual assured destruction, and and therefore we are somewhat vulnerable. And one of the tenets, I guess, of mutual assured destruction is that the American population is the hostage that guarantees that we will not attack anyone else. And um, I objected to my family being a hostage to guarantee, anything. And so I made arrangements, I guess, to build an underground shelter for my family and stock food and medicine for my family so that we would be able to survive even in the event of a nuclear war. And thereby, we are also able to take care of any other crisis situation, such as an economic collapse or a local uh, natural disaster, such as an earthquake. I live in Utah, and therefore we are prone to earthquakes. However, um, those earthquakes are largely manageable, but um, we would probably lose utilities at least, and there could be some civil disorder in a crisis situation, and therefore I have prepared me and my family and a lot of my friends and acquaintances, to be able to take care of those crisis situations as well.
Okay, and one more question. Can you see any movements of your government which shows that as they observe the situation in Ukraine, they started to do something, maybe to check the infrastructure or to make it better for preparing for some this kind of situation?
I know of there are some efforts. There is actually a committee that is dedicated to lobbying the government to produce or to procure extra big transformers to rebuild the power grid in the event of an EMP. I believe we are very vulnerable to an EMP. There's probably at least 30 countries that have the missile technology and a dozen countries that have the nuclear weapons capability in order to um, execute an EMP strike on the United States. And so I think we are very vulnerable to that. And so the power lines themselves would survive. However, the transformers, which are key components to the power grid, do not, well, they do not have backups for those the existing transformers. They're usually manufactured outside of our country. And so there are some movements, and I can send you their information to either mandate that the power grids themselves or that the government can actually procure those critical pieces of equipment in order to protect us. So there are some movements there. I know well, just because of the earthquake potential here, we have quite a few earth-filled dams in our area. They did a reinforcement of the dams, and they brought in large boulders, maybe 1 to 2 meters in diameter, and stacked it against the earth-filled dam. And that's even if the earth-filled dam failed, the large boulders wouldn't be moved that fast, and it would tend to delay any or at least reduce the severity of a flood caused by an earth-filled dam um, failure. So, there are some little things. More often than not, they're focused on the small things. Well, they're focused on small manageable issues, and I'm definitely supportive of that. I think there is definitely better ways to use the resources that our government has to help prepare for disasters. But whereas Switzerland was spending the equivalent of $30 per person um, to prepare for a crisis situation in the 80s. The U.S. government was spending less than $1 per person per year, and that was largely eaten up by the bureaucracy that was meant to manage it. We do have shelters and such for our political leadership, but they leave the citizenry on their own, which I also object to. So I took steps to make sure that my family is well protected. And I think that is probably within the reach of most people. If you understand what to do, Ukraine is a net exporter of wheat and grains and beans and such, and so that can be all those resources need to be allocated. They need to be distributed, perhaps, and everyone should have at least a few pails or buckets of grain suitable for long-term storage. And that's largely what I have. And in my area, because of the influence of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which recommends that every family have a year's supply of food, there's an industry devoted to that, and it is very easy to get a year's supply of food. It's just the basic foodstuffs that like wheat, rice, and beans that can sustain you in a crisis situation. And even some person living in an apartment building can store a few buckets per person um, in order to take care of that possible need. I can't think of anything worse than having my children be hungry and me not be able to feed them. So the problem is distribution. I know the foodstuffs already exist probably inside your country, but in a wartime or in a crisis situation, the problem is distribution. But if you pre-distribute the food, then that problem goes away. And there's also um, uh, there's ways of what would you say? Expedient ways to also cook the food and a few things like that. And all that material, all that information is available in the Journal of Civil Defense.
Okay, thank you very much for interview. After we made this after we make this report and it is on our website, I'll send a link to your manager. And thank you very much. And I've got your email, so I can send it directly to you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Okay. We are anxious to help anyone who wants to receive help in order to survive crisis situations. It's what our organization does. Um, uh, you've talked to Roseanne. She's the only paid
Yes.
employee in the organization. Everything else is volunteer, and so it's our passion. It's something that we do, and we are anxious to help anyone else. So please do call or email me if you need any information. I can send you the links to the places where you can get the clothing or make the water treatment kits or any of that kind of nature, anything of that nature. We would love to help you however we can, and we were happy to do this interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye. Look
Bye
forward
bye.
to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.